Good morning. It's Gimmel Tammuz, Tufshin Pei. It's 26 years since the Rebbe's Neshama returned on high to the Eibishter. We call that a Yom Hilula because the Rabbi in Zohar HaKadosh calls his own day of passing, Lag Baimer, a Yom Hilula, a day of celebration. Actually, the Gemara refers to a Hilula as a wedding day. In other words, the wedding is called a Hilula. And the question is, why do you call the day when the Rabbi passed away, why does he call his day like a wedding day? I mean, it seems to be the total opposite of a wedding. Someone passes away, it's a very sad thing. So this has been spoken about by the Rebbe probably every Yud Shvat and many, many times, and he explained briefly that the idea of a wedding and the idea of a histalkus, a passing of a tzaddik, are one and the same. And what is that? That is that on high there is a celebration when a tzaddik's neshama returns to the Eibishter. And what's the celebration? And number two, if the celebration is for on high, what does it have to do with us here? We're left bereft. We're left empty. So the Alter Rebbe in Igeres HaKodesh 27 in the Biur, there's a Biur over there, you can look it up later. The Alter Rebbe explains what is the specialty and how we benefit from the departure of a tzaddik. Could you imagine? And the Alter Rebbe says that while a tzaddik was alive, his emunah and his love for Hashem and his awe for Hashem, emunah, ava, and yira, are limited and contained to the confines of life. And in the confines of life, there's only so much you can benefit from. So, for example, you mentioned getting $1 from the Rebbe. Your father got $1. That means if you were in Crown Heights during the years that he distributed $1 Sunday morning, you got $1. Or if he sent $1 with someone else for you, you received it. But if you weren't, you didn't get it. Or let's say a Farbrengen, right? They have now, Jem puts out these Farbrengens, and last night I was watching one for over an hour after Ma'ariv and Shul, and it was very inspiring, It was a Farbrengen from the Rebbe's Yom Haledes, Yud Aleph Nissen, 1972. So many years back, and I was a young boy then. I don't believe I was at the Farbrengen, although I lived in Brooklyn, but I wasn't there, and it was very inspiring. And in fact, you see everything up close. In a way, you see better, and you can, if you know what's going on, you kind of know better what's going on because you see it right on in front of you. Whereas when you were standing there, you were far away. You were here, there, things blocked you, and So says the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe says that the tzaddik, the inspiration from the tzaddik to the person and people who identify with the tzaddik is limited to the vessel of life, and it's filtered by life. Whereas after his departure, the emunah and the ava and the yira of the tzaddik is limitless. In other words, is 24/7. This idea is ultimately the idea of a wedding. Why? What's the idea of a wedding? A wedding is the continuation of seed. A father and mother have a child, and then they raise that child, and they bring the child to the chuppah, and the intent is, and the hope and prayer is, that child will procreate and bring another family, etc. So it's considered what we call in Hebrew a binyan adei ad. And this was a term that the Rebbe wished Chasam Kala and the parents, you should have an everlasting edifice, an everlasting binyan. So the idea of a wedding being eternal, and the idea of the departure of a tzaddik and the neshama being eternal are one and the same. And therefore, the Zohar, the Holy Zohar, calls the departure of Rashbi, and so too for all tzaddikim, a hilula. That's a basic explanation why the term hilula is used for the departure of a tzaddik. Now,
May I ask you a question about that?
Yes.
So,
yeah.
In Eretz Yisrael, when it's Rabbi, like Blamer, they always call it the Rashbi's Hilula, right? That's what people don't call. People don't say, like in America, people say Lag Blamer, and here they call it the Rashbi. You're going to the Rashbi, the Rashbi's Hilula. So is that the same kind of thing, or that's because? Is that like a Lubavitch thing, or it's not a Lubavitch thing?
No, it's not Hasidish either. It's the Zohar. Rashbi writes in his own Zohar regarding his upcoming, whenever he's passing, he calls it a Hilula. That's it. That's from the Zohar. That's not from Gemara, and it's not from Hasidus, and it's not from Musar, it's not from Mishnah, it's not from Halacha, it's from a Zohar. And we believe the Rashbi wrote the Zohar. So that's, so it has nothing to do with Lubavitch. By the way, we have a good friend of mine, Shlomo Hamburger, online. Welcome. From the Washington, D.C., Potomac, Maryland area. So welcome to the Farbrengen. Anyway.
Welcome.
So the question is, so we have an explanation, okay, but practically, Farbrengen is not a time for theoretical, philosophical discussions. That's a shiur, that's a lecture, that's a study. The Farbrengen, kind of bottom line, heart to heart, and get your hands dirty. Get your hands dirty. Let's do something about this. So here we are, 26 years later. Heard that the Rebbe passed away. I was at the Kaisel, but not at the Kaisel. I was waiting to go into the tunnels underground. The Kaisel, they're called the tunnels. And there was a Lubavitcher who today lives already in Crown Heights, a very fine gentleman. And he was going to take me because he needed special permission at the time, that because I wanted to go at a certain time. So he gave me, he had an inn, and before we went into the tunnels, I saw two bachurim running to the Kaisel. The Rebbe was very ill. Everyone knew that he was very ill. And I said to myself, I don't like this running. This is not a good sign. That's what I said to myself. I went in. I think it was like 9:15, sometime around 9. I went into the tunnels with him, and there's a place underground over there, under the Kaisel, that straight up is where the Dome of the Rock, what they call today the Dome of the Rock, we call that the Even Shatia, which is where Adam and Chava were formed from, the most holy place. That if you go straight up, you supposedly will hit that rock. And on the wall, on the stone on the wall, there's a trickle of water coming out. I assume those that are, all of you in Eretz Yisrael have been there, and if you haven't, you better go there. Anyway, and the tradition is that Hashem is crying, and it's coming through the water, the trickle, the tear. He's crying for the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And people stop over there and they say Tillim. So I was aware of this tradition, so I stopped there and I said Tillim. We continued the tour of the tunnel. I came out a half an hour or an hour later, and then there was a message waiting for the rabbi that took me in. And the message was that they're dancing in Crown Heights. So again, I didn't have to be a world's genius and professor to figure out this isn't a very happy dancing. I just had a gut feeling that the Rebbe passed away. And indeed, when the rabbi called New York, he found out that the Rebbe passed away. And it seems to me it was, around the time when I was standing at the wall and the trickle of water, the tears were coming out. And I remember that like it's now, 26 years ago. So I didn't make the Levaya. I went to Kfar Chabad, and they had a big screen, and I saw the Levaya there. I was in Eretz Yisrael because my father and uncle donated a Sefer Torah for my grandfather in Bnei Brak. So this was before Gimmel Tammuz. So, and then the Rebbe's Histalkus was right there, so we didn't even get a chance to go back, although I did. Oh, wait, okay. So I'm coming out now, and I'm saying to myself, I got to get back to New York. We had already the Torah thing. I got to get back to New York. I went to the airport. Oh, before that, I'm walking up the steps from the Kosel all to the old city to get on a bus or a taxi to go back to my hotel. And it's quiet. You understand? It's Sunday morning at 10:30. All the Yingalach and the Begalach are in yeshiva, right? And people are working, and it was mamish quiet going through and I had this like weird feeling, a very weird feeling. And I'm saying to myself, Chaim Dalfin, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, such a big tzaddik, such a world leader, just passed away, and things are so normal here. Like, I'm feeling so intense and so nervous and so stressed and, and so upset, but no one around me seems to feel anything. It feels like it's a regular Sunday morning. And I remember that this was, this added to my stress. Like, why isn't everyone jumping? Why isn't everyone crying? Why isn't everyone storming, Why isn't everyone out of their house and talking about it? Nothing. And then I went to the hotel, and then I went to the airport, and I had a return ticket on TWA at the time. So I went up to the offices because it was swamped with Lubavitchers from every shade and every color and the whole airport, Ben Gurion, was full of Lubavitchers. And everyone's trying to get a flight to New York. So I went to the office upstairs on the second or third floor at Ben Gurion, and I spoke to a top deputy, and he said, I would get you, flying you home free without a charge is not the issue. You won't make it to the Levaya. I can put you through here and through there. You're not going to make it to the funeral. Because we figured out the timing, right? So, once he said that, I said, oh, because all non-stops, whatever there was, one or two that were, were already booked. It wasn't placed for one person. So I would have to go through Europe, and through Europe, I wouldn't make it in time. The bottom line is, I didn't go that day. I waited another day or two, and I came during Shiva. And during Shiva, everyone had a chance to be Menachem Ovel, pay a Shiva call to the Rebbe in his house. And then that year, the Rebbe, I think, Farbrengen every Shabbos, almost every Shabbos, and he spoke about the theme of Ahacha Yiten Liba. His wife, Rebbe Chaya Mushka, was Chaya Mushka, and there is this idea of Ahacha, and the living will take to heart. And he spoke about that idea. And this is the first point I want to make, what I observed. Here is a person who lived through basically, almost 100 years, 90 years from 1902. It's now 19, I'm sorry, I mixed up the two. Here, it's his own passing, right? But I'm saying earlier by his wife's passing. Rebbe Chaya Mushka, he spoke about V'chayitim V'liba. So here we are, thinking about what can we do to live with a departure. When a parent passes away, God forbid, when a loved one passes away, and everyone knows what we just had, the COVID and everything else, and May Hashem Yishmar, that we should only have simchas and good health, and it should be abolished and never come back again, Im Yirtzeh Hashem. So, what do you do with death? I mean, it's a reality. The Rebbe writes in a letter to a teenage girl who lost her mother a Kronite's girl. And she wrote to the Rebbe how she's the oldest of a whole family, and she's distraught and upset, and the Rebbe said, we see in halacha there are periods of mourning: 3 days, 7 days, 30 days, 11, 12 months, and then the yahrzeit. Says the Rebbe to this teenage girl, what do we learn from that? That if you mourn more than the allotted time, whatever the mourning requires for that allotted time, and you mourn more than that, then you're not accepting God. In other words, your God is defined by how you feel. And if your God is defined by how you feel, it's not the God, it's not Hashem of the Torah. It's your man-made Hashem. It's your man-made God, which is not God. It's an oxymoron. God is not human. And the Rebbe says to her, if you don't accept God in death, you don't accept God in life. And if halacha says that for 30 days you mourn this way, and after 30 days you're not supposed to mourn this way anymore, and you do, it's again your man-made God, and you're preaching what God wants. And this needs to be thought about. It's easy said, but it needs to be thought about. So what do we understand from this? We understand that a yahrzeit of any person, and especially a tzaddik who impacted the world in such a major way, is about growth. It's not about stagnation and past for the sake of past history. You all know that I'm a historian, and I live with history. I'm totally enamored with history. That's what I do. It's my lifeline is studying history and writing history and trying to understand properly, But nevertheless, you have to know it's history. And what's more important than history is the now and the future. Because if the history doesn't teach us how to behave now and in the future, then it's basically relegated to a museum. And things that are relegated to a museum are inanimate and dead. In other words, it doesn't have a purpose. It's just a pie in the sky, philosophies. It has nothing to do with your real life. So the whole purpose of Gimmel Tammuz, a celebration, a yahrzeit like today, 26 years later, is to make us better and to see what we can do in the upcoming year to make the neshama of the Rebbe be more alive in the world. And now, what do I mean about being more alive than in the world? I mean, my friends, how much do we have to drink today? I mean, the Rebbe's not here 26 years, and that if you go out here, I'm in Borough Park, ask any chassid here, any Jew on the streets here, they'll tell you, what are you drinking? Okay. I mean, I don't know if you have observed, how do other Orthodox Jews celebrate a yahrzeit? And a yahrzeit of a tzaddik or a Rosh Hashiva or a rabbi, a rav, they frankly don't make a big deal about it. Now, I know some make a suda, but if you pay attention the way Chabad, and I'm not talking about the Chabad of the Rebbe, but you look at the way the Rebbe celebrated the previous Rebbe's Yud Shvat, his yahrzeit. It was a monumental world's activity. It was a day of reflection, a day of seriousness, a day of contemplation, and a day of good resolutions. And if you compare that to the way it's done in most other communities, what's by them the big thing? The suda, the meal, and the food, and the l'chaim. And they don't, they barely drink l'chaim, but okay. And I've told you over and over the story with the holy tzaddik, the Saraf, the Strelisker from the Rebbe of Strelisk, who forgot one year that it was his mother's yahrzeit. And his mother came to him in a dream and he said, "My son, I could forgive you for not saying Kaddish. I can forgive you for not learning Mishnayos from my soul. And I can forgive you for not lighting a candle," which, by the way, everyone should light a candle in their home today for the Rebbe's Neshama if you can, or have your wife do it or someone else. It's still all day. It would be a special thing to light a candle. Anyway, so she says, "I can forgive you for everything. There's one thing I can't forgive you until you do it. The kichel and the herring and the schmaltz herring and the little vodka, that I can't forgive you for. Because when you bring that to shul and everyone makes a bracha and toasts l'chaim for the neshama, that's the ikar." Now, that story is a powerful story and very true, but it, like in Chabad, everything is filtered through Chochmah Bina Das. You need to understand the story. It's not just a story, another story, and a nice story, and an inspiring story. The story teaches us that the day of a yahrzeit is so powerful. And because the day of a yahrzeit is so powerful, the l'chaim on that day has that power. It's not that just having a little vodka and kichlach and schmaltz herring makes the day. No, it doesn't work that way. Because you can do that and be the same old man, the same old guy, the same old ideas. If we understand that this day is full of new energy and new opportunities, then the l'chaim has a whole different meaning. And that's the perspective of Lubavitch, of Chabad, on the whole issue of l'chaim. I was in shul the other day, another Hasidic shul, and they made a siyum the night before on 2 Masechtas, on 2 Gemaras. And I'm there getting ready to put on towels and film. In front of me, there's this one fellow who's talking to another fellow, and he's going on and on, berating the shul. How could it be? We made 2 siyumim, and all we had was frozen potato knishes. And he's talking like no one else in shul. There's 40 people in shul getting ready for Haidun. And he was like, and I had to control myself. I was right behind him. I wanted to say something. But I kept quiet because it wasn't my place and it wasn't the right venue, and it would make a whole to-do, and because he was really upset. Now, I understand that a siyum, his point was this is not covered. It's not covered to the siyum. And I understand that. But there's it's a fine line between, the siyum or the food. And you want the food. And you must have the food. And you must have a quality of the food. In Chabad, in true Chabad, it was never this way. It was never this way. And that's why in Chabad, I don't know if you know, but the whole idea of kugels on Shabbos and eating kugels and chont and making a big deal about food is totally not where it's at. Even though we have a story here, a story there with the Alter Rebbe, a piece of kugel, but that's not the ikar. The ikar is the davening, the learning, and once you have the davening and learning on Shabbos, then the kugel becomes also inspirational and important. But just to sit down and eat kugel and say, it's Shabbos Kodesh in Chabad, that's abhorring, totally abhorring. You're not going to hear this from many people, and first of all, they don't know, and second of all, they're too embarrassed to say it, but I'll say it, that the whole idea of engaging in food and making a food a big simus, like, in Lubavitch, in Chabad, it was never that way. And you have, and this is important for the celebration of today's day, Gimmel Tammuz. Now, what did the Rebbe stand for, and what does he stand for, even so many years later? The Rebbe's life was dedicated to one thing: Avas Yisrael, really helping another Yid. And look at his own personal life. The Rebbe was a genius. You all know that. I don't have to tell you. He was a genius of a mind. The Rebbe as a child knew the sciences. Astronomy. Do you know that in the Rebbe's room, this is recorded, I think, in the early days, and I saw it in non-Chabad circles from a cousin of the Rebbe. His name was Avram Shalansky. And a writer interviewed him, and he told her that in the Rebbe's room, he and his brothers, in their bedroom, they had charts, astronomy charts on the wall. Not rock star superstars on the wall. Astronomy charts. What are he and his brothers thinking about astronomy? The Rebbe's house was a very sophisticated house, an intellectual house. Both his parents, Reb Leivik, we know his father was a genius of Kabbalah and of Torah. His mother was an educated person. At the time, she was very well trained in the Hebrew language, which was was something that women, Orthodox women at the time didn't really have that training, and B, it was like a pariah in a way. You're a Hasidic woman. What are you doing, mastering Hebrew language? It's like Zionism, and she didn't care. She was what we call in Hebrew a melumedes, educated and intellectual, and this was the environment that the Rebbe and his two brothers grew up in. And at the same time, Shabbos at the table, Shalansky, who lived across the hall in the same apartment building, he says he would hear beautiful Hasidic tunes that made you cry and made you meditate and think about what it's all about, coming from the apartment, and he would be schlepped in and he would knock on the door of his cousins, and he came in not to play with them, but to sit at the table and hear Reb Leivik's beautiful nigunim. So you had a very interesting balance in the Rebbe's home. You had an atmosphere of intellectualism and sophistication, and at the very same time, a very strong sense of Hasidic Judaism. Yes, Yoni.
So two things. So first of all, in Eretz Yisrael, the Chabad, I don't know how it is in America so much, but the Chabad in Eretz Yisrael, they never call it a Kiddush. They always call it either Farbrengen or Isvadut. Isvadut, that's the first thing. So the emphasis is on the Torah and on the singing and not on the food, which is very different than Bayas and Kalbach, where it's very much on the booze and on the food. But,
okay.
That's one thing.
Okay, you support what I said. Go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely do. I definitely do. Second thing, my other question is, can you, when you're talking about the intellectual side of the Rebbe's parents, is that why he went to university? Is that why the Rebbe was also in the Sorbonne? He was in the Sorbonne, right?
No, the Rebbe, that's a fallacy. He was not in the Sorbonne. He was he was in the University of Berlin, and today we have all this in what's called the book, The Early Days. If you haven't seen this book, it's a fascinating. It's not really even a book of reading. It's a book of so much data. Moshe, you have it at home, don't you? The Early Days. Maybe you loan it. Yeah. You'll eat it up, Yoni. I think. Anyway, so there it gives us the records. They found the records. They did 10 years of research. It's a very important piece of history for Lubavitch. Anyway, so the Rebbe went to get a parnosa. Okay, we're sidetracked, but for a moment it's important. The Rebbe didn't go to university like Rabbi Soloveitchik. The Rav, Rabbi Soloveitchik, he went to university to pursue a PhD, and he got a PhD in philosophy. The Rebbe didn't get a PhD, and guess what? He didn't even get a degree from the university. People don't know that. Do you know that? The Rebbe went to take some courses so that he should be able to enroll in a engineering program where they'll give him an engineering certificate so that he should be able to get a job in engineering. And that's what he got. And the details, the names, are all documented there. And that's why when he came to America in 1941, he worked at the Navy Yard in Brooklyn here, not far from me, as a draftsman. But he had a background in mechanical engineering. So Did he go to university? Yes. He physically went to the University of Berlin and sat in on certain classes, and he's registered, him and his wife, I think his wife too, in certain classes, I think. But you don't see any record of him staying for years and getting this degree and that degree. No, that you don't. Okay, so let's go back now. Yes, Moshe.
What about in France and Paris?
So in Paris, he went to another such school to finalize the degree. I don't believe. Shlomo, do you remember? Do you remember? Did it say that he went to the Sorbonne, or they refuted that in early days? Do you recall?
I don't remember without looking.
Right. Me too. Me too. But in France, whether it was the Sorbonne, I don't think it was, but whether it was the Sorbonne or another, it was to get that certificate, okay? It wasn't a college degree as we know it, a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD. It was a degree that gave you, at the time, you were able to use that for engineering. And the Rebbe was in Paris, actually, from 1933 to 1941. I mean, he ran 40, and then he ran to Vichy, until he escaped. So he was there for 7 years, which is a very long time compared to the places that he was before. But he wasn't studying in these places. He was studying a little bit, and then the previous Rebbe, there's the 15th volume of the previous Rebbe's letters, Igros Kodesh, number 15. That's one entire volume of the correspondence between the previous Rebbe and his daughter and the Rebbe. It's a fascinating volume, because there's many, many insights into the Rebbe's life that we never knew about, that you extract from those letters. And you see there that the previous Rebbe wanted him to be a rabbi of a shul. Why? To have a parnasa. You understand? There was no parnasa. It was so difficult to have a parnasa. And the Rebbe is married. Yes, he didn't have any children yet, but he needs a parnasa. So the previous Rebbe says, I spoke to him and they'll hire you. And the Rebbe, in the most respectful way, basically says, thank you, but I'm not ready to make that decision. It's a very interesting, because he did everything for his father-in-law, but in this issue, my gut feeling is that it was his wife who didn't really want he should take that position, but I can't say because it doesn't say. The bottom line is he didn't take the job as a rabbi, right? So and then his father-in-law, I think the previous Rebbe, realized that his heart is not in being a rabbi of his congregation, so he schleps him in to do work for him as a secretary and with Sfarim, and basically he was occupied most of those 7 years, doing working for his father-in-law in Paris and coming to the previous Rebbe in Poland for the Yom Tovim. But let's go back to the point. So what is this Gimmel Tammuz all about? Yes, Moshe Myers, you wanted to say something?
Did the Rebbe leave from Germany with the previous Rebbe to go to France, but he went on his own, or did he go directly?
No, the Rebbe went to Berlin in 19 after his marriage in 28 or 29, and he stayed there while the previous Rebbe moved to Riga, Latvia. He had to leave Russia after they incarcerated him. They told him, out you go. You're a troublemaker. You can't stay in our country. And he went to Riga, Latvia, and then in 33, he moved from there to Warsaw, Poland, and he was in Poland for 7 years till the outbreak of the war when he came to America. Let's go back. So, what is the message? And for us here, we know each other, and how do we deal with this Gimmel Tammuz? So first, we as from Jews, as believing Yidden in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in God, we don't believe in a man, we believe in Hashem. And we believe that Hashem puts people in every generation that are there to help us connect in the best possible way to Hashem. And that's the whole idea of a Rebbe. I mentioned this yesterday, but I'll just elaborate for a moment. A Rebbe is not someone who does your job for you. At least this is not the Chabad version of a Rebbe. A Rebbe is a soul, like I always say, a soul geologist. He knows your neshama, so he's able to guide you, the person who comes to seek his advice, and to learn from him what's best for you to connect to Hashem. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu was. What was Moshe? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was also a Rebbe, wasn't he? What do we say? Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher. So what? Moshe Rabbeinu was just a teacher of Aleph Beis or Gemara, Hasidus or Kabbalah? Of course not. Moshe Rabbeinu, in addition to being a teacher, was a mentor, was a guide, was a counselor. And most importantly, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he told the Jews, do Aleph, Beis, and Gimmel, he was telling them what's best, the way he sees it as a communicator for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, being inspired and gifted by God, like the other prophets, Yeshaya and Yirmiyahu and Shmuel HaNavi. So right away, if you understand this, the whole criticism of Hasidism and Hasidic Jewry and Rebbe and all that falls aside, because if you have that criticism of Hasidic Judaism, you should be criticizing Moshe and Yirmiyahu and Yeshayahu and Shmuel HaNavi and everyone else. And then the argument is, well, they were prophets and we had Nevuah, and the Baal Shem Tov and his students, were not prophets. So I don't want to go into it now, because there is literal prophecy, and then there is the metaphysical issue of prophecy, and that is existent today. Okay, so the Rebbe, as a tzaddik, someone who was devoted to helping Yidden, and although he was educated, and although he didn't want to be in public service, when his father-in-law passes away in 1950, the Hasidim say, listen, we need a leader. Now, you must understand that also wasn't simple. You're talking about, you had people who lived still from the 1800s, 1880s and 90s, and Hasidim of the Rebbe Rashab, they were 20 years older than the Rebbe, and they appoint a 52-year-old man or 50-year-old man to be the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I mean, that's imagine us, okay? We're 40, 50, 60, right? We're going to appoint a 20-year-old to tell us what to do. Everyone knows it's not happening. It's not happening. And even when you have someone that's really special and excels and is great, to dedicate yourself and then listen to what they say and follow is it's very difficult. And nevertheless, the Lubavitcher Hasidim at the time said yes, for whatever reason, and there's a lot to discuss why and how and when, but that's what happened. That was back in 1951, Yud Shvat. And for the next 42 years or so, the Rebbe Farbrengen, and he talks, and from 50 to 60, he dedicates himself basically to educate his own people, his own Hasidim. So he started the women's organization called Neshei Chabad, because in Europe, women were a second-class citizen. You all know that, right? Some still argue it's that way in America too, but the Rebbe didn't see it that way. And the Rebbe said women should be educated, women should learn, women should be productive. And he creates an organization called Neshei Chabad. There was a Jew, Rabbi Levi, the head of the OK, and I knew him. We davened together in our shul here, Borough Park. He had an aunt who was the daughter of a person called the Malach. If you read my book, Chabad Portraits, Volume 1, I have a whole chapter on this individual. And there's a whole story with him. And he was born in 1860, I think, and he had seniority, and he was very religious and a chassid, but a very big zealot. So Rabbi Levi once came with his wife to visit his aunt. And after the niceties, he says, we have to go because the Rebbe is speaking to the women, so I have to bring my wife to Crown Heights. When she heard her nephew saying, I have to bring my wife to listen to the Rebbe speak, she gave him a slap. Yeah, she gave him a slap. An older man. And she berated him. Another story. I was sitting with people who were from the 1940s, and they were shluchim, the senior ones. They were both passed on. One passed on at 100, the other one 95. May their souls be blessed, and they're very special Jews. At that time, I wrote my book called Who's Who in Lubavitch Women. I've written 2 volumes of Who's Who in Lubavitch Men, and 1 women, and my mother of blessed memory, and other women, I memorialized them in this book. And I felt it was important to give the world and Lubavitch, to see how the Lubavitcher women are, what are they made of? And all kinds, not, from Russia. My mother grew up, she was Poland, a survivor, grew up in Costa Rica, and different kinds of women that joined Chabad. So I told the rabbi that was at this Friday night Shabbos table where I came to that I just wrote this book, and his wife was sitting right next to him. When she heard me say that I wrote a book called Who's Who in Lubavitch Women, she just shouted out, says, "Who gives you permission to write that? We don't write about women. What are you doing?" And I'm, she's 85 years old, 80, 85, and I'm, I'm 45, and and I have respect, and I know about their life and what they did, and I'm just, but her husband was so embarrassed, so he says to her, it's all right. They were getting a little senile, a little dementia, it was Lebedik. But you saw, in the middle of the dementia, you saw her essence come out. And she's the daughter of a major Lubavitcher chassid from the Rashab, from the 5th Rebbe. So this idea of putting women on the map was a novelty in the world of Lubavitch. Forget about in the Jewish world. In the world of Lubavitch, I mean the Orthodox world, in the Hasidic world. So the Rebbe worked on this in the 50s. The other thing the Rebbe started in the 50s was the Tzirei Agudis Chabad, the young division of Chabadniks, which means basically to go out and put up menorahs and give mezuzahs out and help people tefillin and kosher their kitchens, called Tzach. T-Z-A-C-H. Tzach, like they have in Kfar Chabad. And this too was a chiddush. Okay, the previous Rebbe in the 1940s spoke about keeping Shabbos. So in Baltimore, in Detroit, in Chicago, he got the Chabad rabbis to get others to march with signs, Shmira Shabbos, close your stores on Shabbos. Okay. But that was also very unusual. But the way the Rebbe took it to the streets in the 50s was on a whole different level, and he needed troops. It's nice that we're talking here, but we need these young Bacharim. There's Mendel, our friend, Shlomo, my mutual friend's son, the young guys, these are the soldiers on the field. And these soldiers go out, and they mamish, they don't care about anything, and sometimes they should, but anyway, they storm the world. And the Rebbe saw this, that he needs to create this feeling in those Russian Lubavitchers and others that came from Europe from devastation. And he made a mind change in them in the 50s. Then the 60s to the 70s, everyone knows we had the counterculture revolution, Vietnam, the killing, the murder of Kennedy, and the killing of Kennedy, and the Sputnik, and it was a whole different scene. And the Rebbe dedicates himself in the 60s to making Bali Tshuva. A Lubavitcher Rebbe from Russia, from a little shtetl with a white beard, talks about Bali Tshuva. And the Orthodox world says, what are you doing? Like we've never seen this. And he says, this is what we need now. Then comes the 1970s, 70s to 80s, And the Rebbe on his birthday, on his 70th birthday, right? The Yud Aleph Nissen, the Farbrengen that I saw last night. He says he would, if you want to give me a gift, I'd like to have 71 new institutions, 70 at least. He says if you make more than 71, that's fine, at least. And the Chabadniks, they roll up their sleeves and they make more than 71 throughout the year. So the whole idea of Chabad houses really took off in the 70s, not in the 60s, right? And then came the 80s, and then he speaks about a moment of silence and many major Jewish ideas that were novel to the Jewish world. A moment of silence, the 7 mitzvahs of Noach, those type of Farbrengens were in the 80s, and also, I forgot to mention, in the 60s and 70s speaks about Russian Jewry a lot, and in the 80s speaks a lot about Eretz Yisrael not giving back any land. This is one second, guys, this is a condensed version of the 40 years or so of the Rebbe's leadership. So what do we do with it now, 26 years later, after Gimmel Tammuz, his neshama returns? We need to take all those ideas, because we have now a load of information, and we now need to unpack it. And guess what? We have enough things to do for 100 years or more, I'm telling you. Because you cannot imagine, especially in the 80s, almost every Shabbos, when he spoke, he initiated something new. And I remember saying to myself, Rebbe, I haven't had a chance to do what you said last week, and already you're demanding more this week. I can't. So our plates are full, and it's written, it's on video, it's there. So we Hasidim and Jews that identify with this holy tzaddik, we have now the job of implementation of those things that he spoke about and suggested for 42 years. And it's not a repeat, I want to emphasize, it's not a repeat, and it's not like it's not new, we need something new. If we don't have something new, it's boring. The same law, the same art, it's like, it's boring. Give me something new, especially today. Everyone, a quick fix. This world we're in is so fixed on everything being exciting and fresh and new, right? And that's the reality now. That's the reality. So you can't go backwards. If you go backwards, you're not going forwards. You're not going forward. So we accept that the world is where it's at now, and we see and understand that this is a step closer to the ultimate plan of Hashem, which is the coming of Mashiach and the unity of the entire world. So we take this and we go with it. But we go with it based on the doctrines and teachings that the Rebbe left in his writings, and it's there for us. Shlomo and I, we learned part of the things that we learned is the Rebbe's father's Torah, called the Torah Levi Yitzchak. Now, you have to understand that the Rebbe's father wrote this in the 1920s, 1930s, and if you sit and learn this seriously, I'm just going to give you an example. You see how it's so relevant today. You have to learn it correctly, or at least attempt to. Then think about it, and then you'll understand how what he wrote 100 years ago can be applied today. The Torah HaKadoshah, the Holy Torah, is a living organism. It's active. It's not stale. And the Rebbe was the individual, at least for what I saw, who made Yiddishkeit a living organism today, not a past experience. So, for example, the Satmar Rebbe, the Satmar Hasidim, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, who I wrote about in my book Satmar and Lubavitch, right? A great man, a great Talmudist, and a real brave individual to bring Hungarian Jewry in its full regalia with the long coat and the payas and the shtreimel to the streets of Brooklyn, of Williamsburg, and Borough Park. And he did it at a time when his own people were clean-shaven and wanted to pursue degrees and wanted to, become more modernized. And he tells him, we're going to bring Hungarian Judaism to the streets here. And it was a revolution. In their world, it was a revolution. So it wasn't like in Chabad we'd go all over and we reach out to all Jews, not just to our own Jews. The Satmar Rebbe did it for his own Jews and in his own little hub called Williamsburg. Right? So although that's a very important accomplishment, and my friends, I tell you, he accomplished. There are thousands and thousands of Satmar Hasidim worldwide, although they have a very a policy with Israel that I believe, and I wrote it in my book, they don't understand really what their Rebbe meant about being anti-Zionists, okay? But the bottom line is they took it in a certain direction, and that's not one that Chabad and most other Jewish organizations and groups agree with. Nevertheless, you don't throw it all out, But what did he do? He did it for his own people. And yes, the kindness is phenomenal. When I had COVID, and it was Pesach, and I was, the Hatzalah came in. They looked like Satmar Hasidim or Hasidim for sure. And on Pesach, they came to check on me every day. Can you imagine? It's Pesach. They're carrying. It was Shabbos. Saving the life into my house. I didn't go to them. I didn't leave my house. They came every day to check my oxygen level and this and that. The chesed that they showed was phenomenal. But nevertheless, it's like it's to their own. You know what I'm saying? Not that if someone wasn't religious, they would go to him too to save a life. I'm convinced of that. But that's not what they seek to do. The Rebbe didn't make a distinction between a Jew who's religious or a Jew who's not religious. I promise you he didn't. The whole idea, and I know this because he wrote this to me back in 1985. In 1985, I received a flyer from Rabbi Shimon of Chicago, and he had a picture of himself, and then the headline, the title was, I am not Reform, I am not conservative, I am not Orthodox, I am a Jew. And then in smaller words, this is at the philosophy of Chabad movement. And I saw this flyer, and I came to Marin County, north of San Francisco, the hot tub capital of smoking marijuana and dope and sitting in a hot tub of the world. In 1980, it was depicted in a movie in the 70s, if you recall. And that's where Chaim Dalfin, a 23-year-old, comes to. And I saw this flyer. So I said to myself, I'm going to make 5,000 copies of this flyer, and I'm going to distribute it and mail it out to the 1,900 people that I had on the Federation's list. And this way they'll all know Chabad is in town and what the real message of Lubavitch is. And I'm here to work with the Reform rabbi and congregation and the conservative. We had one Reform, one conservative, one Reconstructionist, and now one Orthodox/Chabad. No young Israel. No young Israel. Anyway, I printed up 5,000 flyers and put in my picture instead of Rabbi Shimon's picture. Who did I work for? The Rebbe. So I sent it to the Rebbe to just let him know what I'm doing. A few hours later, the secretary calls me and he says, you sent in a flyer to the Rebbe? I said, yes. He says, well, the Rebbe made a comment on your flyer. I said, I don't believe it. Like, I never, it was like, I'm the new kid on the block. I just got myself, I was married a half a year before. My wife and I, after 4 years and 4 months of marriage, we go out to California, to Marin County to start our life. And then I do this. And the Rebbe wrote to me 2-3 lines. The basic message was, don't reawaken old arguments. And I said to myself, what old arguments? So I asked 3 people. I asked Manis Friedman, Rabbi Groner, Olav Sholem, and Rabbi Yoel Kahn, my mashpia. I asked all 3 if they can interpret this answer to me. Why? Because I didn't have Litvaks and Misnagdim in Marin County. We were the only few Orthodox people there. So what old arguments is the Rebbe referring to? If he's referring to the old arguments of Misnagdim and Hasidim from 200 years ago, that wasn't the turf I was in. At the time, I didn't understand it, but now, the last 10 years, writing about Chabad and other groups, especially Litvak groups and rabbis and yeshivas, I understand the Rebbe's answer to me very, very well. How careful I have to be to not cause more arguments and old arguments, but rather bridge people together, which is really the underlying message of all of these books of mine the last 10 years, Shlomo Karlbach and Satper and Lakewood and Hutner, it's all to show unity, although I tackle tough issues and controversy, because otherwise it's not authentic. So I do deal with it, but I try to present both sides fairly. Anyway, I took those 5,000 flyers after I got this answer, and I put them into my little garbage can. I remember. And I said, wow, I had such a great idea, but my Rebbe says it's a terrible idea. And the Rebbe explained more in the answer. And he said, by the fact that I'm writing, I am not Orthodox, I am not Reform, I am not conservative, it means to say that you're not, but there are three divisions, and that's not true. Because the fact that there's a conservative movement or conservative building, and so too Orthodox and Reform, doesn't mean that the Jew is conservative, Reform, or Orthodox. A Yid is a Yid, and there's no difference. So by the fact that I'm saying I'm not, I'm giving credence and accepting that there are three divisions. So the Rebbe said that itself is contrary to what I'm trying to explain in my flyer. Brilliant and correct. And I dumped it out. So that's why I say to you that our Rebbe was such a Yid, a Jew, who loved every Yid, and there was no difference to him at all. And I can give you hundreds of examples to prove this from, my wife had a Zayder of Zalman Serebransky, and he was a chassid from Russia, from Ukraine. And I saw that in his life too, and I saw it in my father-in-law's life too. The Lubavitcher Hasidim, the ones that were understood Lubavitch, Chabad properly, and were plugged in and had humility, there was no difference. And I'm not saying only Lubavitch. There were others too, but by and large, the message of the Rebbe is this: no judgmentalism. No judgmentalism. Now, that doesn't mean to say that in the name of no judgmentalism, you can come in barefoot and go over to the Amid in your shul. There is a decorum. And if the shul requires shoes and socks going to the Amid, you got to wear shoes and socks. And if you're barefoot or you have no socks, stand in the back of the shul or stand on the side of the shul. Menschlichkeit and respectability is part of an institution, right? So of course, let's say the Karlbach shul that Yoni is the Gabay of, one of the Gaboyim, and that, right? And I davened there many times when I was in Bet Shemesh that year. And one of the things that enamored me, that I loved, is I saw the cuckoos, the ponytails, and I saw the Hasidim with the Streimlich, and I saw this and I saw that, and everyone's dancing and singing together. And on one hand, that is beautiful. On the other hand, if the rabbi in the congregation has certain, guidelines as far as who should go to the Yomid and how to dress and how to behave, that has to be respected too. So I don't want anyone to think that, the Rebbe embraced every Jew, meaning to say you could do whatever you want. Chabad is not a place of chaos. And anyone thinks it is a place of chaos, it's not Chabad. You should just know that now. And he's screaming and waving of flags and making yourself crazy. This is not in the Chabad ethos. Chabad is very much plugged into Shulchan Aruch and tradition. But at the very same time, the personal embracement of another Yid is what Lubavitch is all about. So the bottom line, and the end of the Farbrengen for now, is that we need to walk away with this Avas Yisrael sentiment, because that was the number one thing, and we need to learn the Rebbe's talks and his Maimorim and his directive in his letters, And there's no question that you will find answers if you plug yourself in, even today. So I'm not saying it has to be through his letters. I'm not saying, I'm not from those that say you have to only do it through putting a letter in. No. You want to go to the oil, go to the oil. You want to go to 770. You want to be in your house and look at the Rebbe's picture, and that's how you get direction. Kol hakavod. I'm not going to tell you that you're nuts. Everyone has their way of identifying, okay? And as long as within the confines of Jewish law and tradition and doesn't hurt anyone else, it's acceptable. But as the Rebbe told a chassid who wrote to him in 1950, after the previous Rebbe passed away, and he bemoaned the fact, he said, our Rebbe is gone. How am I going to get, direction? And the Rebbe said, if you connect and you want to find guidance from the Rebbe, he will come through the window, he will jump through the roof, and today I would say he would come through the fax. This is outdated. The email, the Twitter, and all the gadgets that we have, you could get your answer. And I talk personally because I've seen this for 26 years in my life and other people's life. If you're connected to Hashem and you don't get lost and you go on the derech and you're in tune and you're not looking for your own interpretation, sometimes we write into the Igros Kodesh and we make our own interpretation to fit you. That's not being genuine. That's having a selfish motive. Okay, now, Yoni, you had a question or a point.
Rabbi, my question is to something that we spoke in last week's shir about the Frierdiker Rebbe's relationship with the rest of the Gedolim. Remember you said that it was very tense with the Litbaks, with the other, not necessarily Hasidim, but other different things. My question is, did that carry on to the Rebbe, or once the Rebbe became the Rebbe, there was a different process and a healing process between Lubavitch and the other mainstream,
No, it did not. It did not cease. In fact, it became more problematic for many years. Today, it's not that way, but it was very much more. I would say just the opposite. That with the Frierdiker Rebbe, with Rabbi Aaron Kotler in the 40s, but overall it was less than the relationship between them and Lubavitch and the Rebbe, and even other Hasidic groups. So, for example, in the late 70s, 80s, you had the Satmar Hasidim fighting Lubavitch. And then in the 80s, 90s, you had the Rabbi Shach of Panovich fighting Lubavitch. So I would say no. It was more intense. It was more intense. There's jealousy. Whatever. This is a whole discussion. That's exactly what I'm writing about and trying to understand. But at the end of the day, it's is my father better than your father? And and the Rebbe didn't look at it that way. But they did. That's my humble opinion. They did. In other words, why do you decide what Yiddishkeit should be? We're going to decide. Who are we? We're all of the establishment. And by the way, the modern Orthodox movement, Rabbi Soloveitchik's in the Young Israel world, the old Young Israel, not the new Young Israel, was totally right-wing, but the black hatters. The old Young Israel got a lot of flack from the community, from the same Litvaks. Rabbi Soloveitchik was the biggest pariah. Till today, they won't allow his teachings of Torah into their yeshivas. Could you imagine? Could you imagine such a genius of Torah, such a Jew? Rabbi Soloveitchik was such a Talmud Chacham and such a special Yid, the grandson of Chaim Brisker, of the people who they study day and night and talk about. They won't let the grandson's Torah and teachings in their yeshivas. I spoke to an author, a Talmud Chacham here, who puts out these essays every Shabbos. And I asked him, and he's a Lubavitcher, he's a big Talmud Chacham, Shas. And I said to him, why don't you include Rabbi Soloveitchik's Torah? He says, because if I do, Lakewood will take my essays and burn them or won't let them in. So he has to hide it or not put it in. And you're talking about, you're talking about shtuyot. You're talking about, and see, this is something that I learned from the Rebbe, and I learned from him to stay away from, to really stay away from very far, because if you open up the Pandora, it's ugly. It really is ugly. So don't even give it any credit, no credence. Don't pay attention to it, and just be focused on the mission. So then you're asking, so Chaim Dalfin, why are you writing about these things? Because the fact is that this is in the community. So my hope is, and I see Baruch Hashem, that many people who comment and write to me and tell me that they hear me. Doesn't mean they agree, but I want them to hear the other side and to see there's a balance, and that the Rebbe was not coming as an outrageous person trying to overrun them and bury them and not accept what they say. But Yoni, if you're asking how it was for the 40 years of his lifetime, was a lot of criticism and a lot of disagreements, and we're just now, I think, seeing the calm point where in Panovich they'll sing the Alter Rebbe's Niggin and the Rebbe's Niggin Samalacha Nafshi with all the rabbis on the dais. I mean, who would ever believe it? Or someone told me the other day, Yutas Kislev in Yerushalayim at Binyanei Ha'umah, right? There are Litvaks lined up taking tests in Tanya. Now they're getting paid, but how much are they getting paid already? But nevertheless, during the time of Rabbi Shach and in the 70s and 80s, this would never happen. Never. Regardless of how much money you paid the Litvak students, they would never learn Tanya and take tests in Tanya. But now it happens. So there is a very interesting coming together of sorts today in between, and Satmar and Lubavitch are like best friends. So, it's a different world. But to say that the ethos has changed, not entirely. It's still in the process. To say that a Satmar is going to come say to himself, the anti-Zionist zealotry is not acceptable, and my Rebbe and those people were wrong. They're coming to it. A lot of them. I'm not even talking about those that fry out, leave, Satmar and Orthodoxy. Even I've heard, from others, we can't continue teaching this in our schools. I heard this in the name of a big Satmar here in the Catskills, whatever, and he says we cannot teach Rabbi Teitelbaum's initial, zealotry because the young kids don't go for it. That's amazing. So things are changing. Things are changing slowly, and in that way, we're living at a very good time, and a great opportunities of people getting together. I would say that much better than during the Rebbe's lifetime, no question about it. Anyone else had a question or a comment? I didn't say any stories really, the Rebbe, so I'm going to send you the 25-minute Farbrengen I did for online, and there you'll hear 3 stories, new stories and lessons, and enjoy that. Share it with your family. Today is a day also to speak to your own family, your wife, your children, grandchildren, friends about the neshama of the Rebbe. This is an importance, not just another Jewish figure. This is and to give tzedakah to a moisid that's associated with Lubavitch and Chabad, to write a pidyon nefesh if you're able to send it to the OL, or to ask someone to read for you there, and to learn extra Chassidus and Nigla a little bit, a line here, 2 lines here, and to light a candle, and to learn some Mishnayos for the Rebbe's name, his name. Do whatever you can. Make the day so that tomorrow you'll say, wow, I really, did something concrete for the Rebbe's neshama. And may Hashem Taka help that Mashiach should come, bottom line, and everyone that's passed on, including the Rebbe, should rise, and we should all go together, and all the differences should disappear, and we should just love each other and really care for each other, and without agendas, pure, good old Avas Yisrael, loving each other because we're Yidden, and that way we should also love humanity. People are good, and whites and blacks and Hispanics and Puerto Ricans and riots and not riots. The Rebbe, by the way, you see, Dinkins was a black mayor, an African the mayor that we had here in New York, and he came to the Rebbe and he spoke to him. The Rebbe didn't even engage in any of that type, what color are you? It's absurd, what color are you? But unfortunately, we have this negativity that's out there, and it needs to be abolished, and it's hard sometimes, like I told you, when I was 9 years old, my sister and I were mugged. We lived in East Flatbush, which is near Crown Heights. It was the end of the 60s, 69, and it was a very tense time in there, and we were young children walking, and we were mugged by an African American. He had a big stick, and thank God he didn't do anything to us. But the damage that it did to me, was took years to instill. If I'm walking in the street and I see an African American behind me, I get scared. I have some fear in me. It's something. It's trauma that you have from childhood. So I understand that it's difficult to overcome and not put the blame. There's a reason why I feel this way, because I was mugged at 9 years old by an African American. But it doesn't equal having hatred, and things have changed. And today, the African American community is much more, civil and non-violent, whatever. But again, this is not my department or our department. Our department is serving Hashem, helping another Yid, giving tzedakah, doing, learning, and the importance of learning. I emphasize that Rebbe was the Lubavitcher Rebbe that showed that learning is not just Hasidus and Kabbalah, but Gemara and Halacha was, by him, the ultimate. So if anyone says to you, Lubavitch is not into learning, it's a fallacy and a lie, because look at the Lubavitcher Rebbe, how many Svarim they have that are mostly not in Hasidus. It's mostly in Halacha and Gemara and life's lessons. So we need to learn more, and everyone here should make a resolution to learn something of the Rebbe's Torah, in addition to the Rebbe's father's Torah and the previous Rebbe's Maimorim that we learned together. But the Rebbe's Torah, I'm talking to myself, because sometimes it's more interesting to learn the Rebbe Levi's Torah or the previous Rebbe's Maimorim. You look at the Rebbe's Maimorim, it's so hard. And in a way, they're so non-practical, it's like more esoteric and more, this level and that level. It's a very difficult learning, but there's a way to learn that too, to make it more practical. And I wrote a book called Demystifying the Mimer. I wrote 2 books years ago, Demystifying the Mystical and Demystifying the Mimer. And I took Baruch Hashem, a lot of my ideas that I did in my younger years have been taken by other Lubavitch organizations, GEM and others, and it's fine. I was the first one to interview personalities in my book, Conversations with the Rebbe. I interviewed Chaim Potak, Shoshana Carden, Yitzchak Shamir, Abraham Twersky, and another 10 personalities, okay? That's exactly what GEM has been doing the last 20 years. And Kol HaKavod, and I've worked with them together, and I gave them my material. So going back to the Mimer, before the Hasidic Heritage series, I put out a book about 20 years ago called Demystifying the Mimer, where I took a Mimer for each Yom Tov and made it user-friendly and showed, in addition to what it says in the Mimer, the practicality of the Mimer, and I gave it, titles and synopsis and broke it up. So you could take a Mimer, the Rebbe, that's on one hand, offhand, looks very mystical and esoteric and complicated, and when you learn it well, you can extract from it the practical aspect in your life. And so we need to do on a day like this. It's a day of reflection to make achlata, to start learning something of the Rebbe's Torah, or if we're learning already, a little more of his teachings on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. It should be more of our weekly experience. Guys, have a great day. Have a great day. Shalom. And may the neshama of our Rebbe have an aliyah. L'chaim, l'chaim. L'chaim, Yonason, l'chaim, Yonason, l'chaim, Yonason, l'chaim. Moshe Myers, Moshe, Shloima, and Yoni. And everyone else on the Facebook Live. I see Zachary from Shalavim. And I see Yaakov Spiel from Chicago. L'chaim to you guys too. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a great day.